Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pocho, and we have a lot of cards to cover. I decided not to do a spoiler breakdown on Friday, and there have been cards released for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and today we got a release of the Bond mechanic. There was an article written demonstrating what Bond is, what it does, and showing off 3 new Bond cards. So we'll get to those last. First things first, I'm going to go through the roundup for the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday cards, and we're going to talk about each of them and how they feel in terms of how I think about them and like what I think they'll be good for. First off, we actually have a new Ashara. Ashara, Ruthless Assassin, still holding on to her name taker and looking ready to go. A 3/3 deadly. When she attacks with exactly one other unit, she gets +4 strength and quick draw this turn, which makes her a 7/3 deadly. Ashara is normally a 6/3 deadly for 5, so this is actually a more aggressive Ashara when it comes to offense. At the end of the turn, she kills the unit. Okay, so there's a lot to break down with how this mechanic works and what's interesting about it, but I would say that overall this card is very, very powerful. As a 3/3 for 3, that stat line is about straight average, like it's Spire Chaplain average. It's, you know, it's not good enough to be amazing by itself, but because she's deadly, she can trade up with basically anything, and because she has the ability to get a lot of other good stuff, like Ashara is in a pretty good spot as far as like general stat line goes. Dying to Suffocate and Torch is a bit of a tempo loss, and that's the big risk with Ashara, and the other main problem with her is that she has that double shadow influence, but overall neither of those are going to be roadblocks to people playing Ashara, and neither is this sacrifice problem that she has. So let's talk about the sacrifice problem. Ashara can attack with exactly one other unit to get +4 strength and quick draw for the turn. That means she has to be used in particularly specific decks, but because it's pretty likely that in a high removal type set, you are going to have that situation where you actually do have 2 units at a time, or basically it's more likely that you're going to get that chance. There's a lot to work with here. You can work with charge units to make sure that you have a unit at the exact time. You can work with stealing other units with madness. You can work with token decks, so you can attack with a single Grenadin and leave some back to block. There's usually a lot of good reasons to attack with just 2 units, and the other thing that's really interesting about it is that you get to basically swing with her, and the trade that you create is actually bad both ways. So if you block Ashara, then she has quick draw and deadly, she kills the thing no matter what, and then you lose a unit on the other side, but that unit gets damaged through. So if you're just attacking with, like, say, an Instigator and Ashara, just a straight up aggro deck that wants to do, like, massive, like, synergistic cards, you're gonna push the damage that you want. So, like, a Stone Scar aggro deck that really wants to be that sort of reach type burn deck with Champion of Chaos and Argenport Instigator and Impending Doom can push damage by making Ashara a 7/3 and getting the other thing basically guaranteed to push through because you don't want to block it because it's going to die anyways. On the other hand, if you kill the unit, then Ashara doesn't have anything to kill. She still gets the +7, and you get all of that damage through. And the important thing is that if you remove Ashara, it does say that she kills the unit, so Ashara being in the void should prevent that unit from dying if you kill Ashara, and she's the big threat. Whereas if you kill the unit that Ashara wants to kill, then that's just going to be basically a benefit with no drawback. So this is not really weighted to give Ashara a lot of weakness. There are situations, of course, where basically you are losing card advantage by yourself, but interacting with Ashara's pattern is actually pretty hard, and that's what kind of makes this card really strong. A 3/3 deadly is just good to attack with in general. You have a 7/3 deadly quick draw if you have the fun little trick there, and overall that pattern should be fairly easy to enforce and to have a really, really good time with. Like, I think that overall this is just an awkward card for your opponent, and it makes it very, very hard for them to deal the damage that you want. So, yeah. I'm very in favor of Ashara. I think that she's a pretty solid card, and she kind of brings back the sort of mid-range Stone Scar burn archetype, which we haven't seen as much of lately with Flame Blast's nerf. We might need to see a little bit more burn for her to be awesome in that situation, but she also works well with sacrifice abilities and tokens, amongst which is Kennel Master, which we'll talk about in just a second. All right, so that's Ashara. She's interesting. Most of the cards here that were spoiled were pretty interesting rares and legendaries. There is one common that we'll talk about, or one fairly common card, which is Silverwing Smith. And sure, let's go to that one next. Silverwing Smith is a 1/4 flying that says when you gain armor, you gain an additional +1 armor. Importantly, this is not for every 1 armor you gain 1 armor. It doesn't just double up. So, like, if you play a weapon like a 3/4 or something like that, then you will get a 3/5 and not a 3/8. But nonetheless, the extra armor on relic weapons is very, very relevant, and any relic weapon does generate its own armor, so this is an additional +1 health on every relic weapon that you play. In addition, like, gaining armor is pretty easy through other means. You can do Roland's Favor, you can do a lot of different things like Stronghold Visage, which is just a really, really fun one. But basically, setting those cards up allows you to just gain a lot of extra health, and then the card itself is a really reasonable Valkyrie that sticks on the board as a 1/4. So it blocks most things, and that's pretty reasonable. Like, the stat line is not offensive. It's much better in draft than in ranked, just because of the way that it is particularly oriented against Torch and oriented against smaller units. I think it's very, very good in draft because it is a solid pairing for Valkyrie decks to set up for Valkyrie Spire Guard, the 3/3 that turns into a 6/6 if you have extra Valkyrie around. But overall, the extra armor value there makes it extremely good in that situation. I like this card a lot better than the Valkyrie Enforcer, the 2/2 that gives armor whenever you play a weapon. So yeah, this card is pretty solid. Should be a really, really good draft uncommon pick, especially if you're playing a Valkyrie-based deck, which, as it turns out, there are some Valkyrie ally cards and some Valkyrie bond cards, and we're going to be playing around with those a lot. All right. So yeah, Valkyrie Attendant is interesting. All right, we got many more interesting cards, some cool legendaries, but I think the most exciting one is probably Vicious Highwayman. So let's talk about that one next. Vicious Highwayman is demonstrating a lot of things about set 3 all at once. So first off, it's a Stone Scar card, 4/2, Warcry and Charge. Summon, deal 1 damage to an enemy, and when an enemy unit dies, Vicious Highwayman gets Lifesteal and Quick Draw this turn. Okay, so that's a lot to break down. As double red, double shadow, it's a little bit hard to play, but the most interesting thing about this card immediately is that it has Warcry. And the reason that that's interesting is because it means that in set 3, Warcry is no longer a Rakano-specific ability. So previously, Warcry was Rakano-specific. You could only have it in red or green. And that means that there may be other color-shifted abilities, but it also means that Warcry is more likely to be on its way towards what I would call like a permanent skill. I can't remember what they call it. Evergreen is what they usually talk about. And that's really good because Warcry is one of Eternal's strongest keyword abilities. Like, if you are playing with Warcry as a skill, you're generally having a good time. Rakano decks are a lot of fun to play, and aggro Rakano with Warcry is really, really interesting. So this means that they're really willing to continue to explore Warcry designs, of which there are many, and I think there's a lot of interesting design space there. And yeah, that just means good things for the health of the game. So Vicious Highwayman is a harbinger of good things to come. But in addition, he's just kind of an interesting card. This guy has 4 skills on the turn that he is played if he kills a 1-drop unit. And he also gets you a potential 4 health swing that is basically impossible to block with a Warcry. So that's a lot going on all at once. And if you actually get all of those things together, then Vicious Highwayman is pretty sweet. But even so, just playing a 4/2 that immediately gives a +1/+1 bonus to the top card of your deck, that's a minor amount of value for a card that is gonna have to be removed in some fashion. So I think you can get easily at least a temper, a free temper, out of this card, and that is card advantage in Stone Scar that you are probably going to be pretty happy with. But this card can do a lot more than that, and he can function pretty well with removal. He can function pretty well with all sorts of interesting things. I think Vicious Highwayman has some cool cycles to him. I think his influence requirement is very, very deep, so he's going to be basically Stone Scar only, but overall he's not too bad to play. I really like that he has Warcry. I like that he has like some interesting fun, weird little triggers with the 4 abilities. I kind of wish that I could play Master's Lesson on him, but I don't think that's going to happen. Regardless, he's kind of a fun card if you manage to get into like red, purple, green with Hero of the People. I don't think he actually gives Lifesteal and Quick Draw to Hero of the People, but regardless, It's pretty cute. Vicious Highwayman's a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm pretty into this card. It's very, very interesting. All right, next up. Yeah, removal or killers for his trigger are the correct way to go about it. Okay, most of the rest of the cards that were spoiled over the weekend were legendaries, and let's talk about Kennel Master next, because that is a strange one. This is our 1-cost legendary, a 1/1 that is a soldier, which is kind of weird. He's not a gunslinger at all. At the start of your turn, if you have 3 or more spells in your void, he plays a 2/2 hound with charge and reckless. There are a lot of different things that you can do with this card. The 2/2 hound with charge and reckless is going to be most relevant as a sacrifice outlet, I would say. You can attack with it, then you can devour it for value. You can do a lot of cool things with that if you are just playing around with lots and lots of spells. So if you're playing a Stonescar Combust, Devour, Madness deck, then Kennel Master is going to fit right in. He's also going to fit right in alongside Ashara, the Ruthless Assassin. Or is she ruthless? She's something. She's going to fit in alongside new Ashara pretty well. So Kennel Master can do quite a bit there because he plays a 2/2 hound with charge. That hound gets to immediately attack with Ashara, and then Ashara gets the bonus and doesn't really mind that she has to kill the dog. Kennel Master is a little bit careless about his dogs, and that's a little bit worrisome. Poor sad doggos, but at least they're well fed. In any case, you have 3 or more spells to activate it. That's a little bit tricky. Kennel Master is a better late game card than he is an early game card, and that's a little bit interesting. He's also really easy to kill. Overall, I'm not sure if he fits in aggro decks, but I think he fits more in long game decks. So there's a lot of ways to kill him, but if you can actually get him out on the board early and then just sort of play into your late game, then he's probably going to be fine. It's really a matter of whether or not there are Vara's favors pretty heavy in the meta, if Lightning Storm is particularly popular, if Rock Slide is particularly popular, because those cards really, really do quite a bit to make sure that Kennel Master is not a good card, and that's something that you have to pay attention to. But he is also a card that at 1 you can get back with Shadowlands Guide, so playing him in token-style decks that want sacrifice outlets is really not bad, and I'm pretty sure you might be able to play the Hound before you sacrifice to Obrak. So if you play that before Obrak the Feaster, then yeah, Obrak has something to eat. Again, it is a dog, which is a little bit sad. But regardless, Kennel Master's an interesting design. Gonna be more niche than anything, but I think he's kind of fun to build around. Okay, next up is Jotun Burst Song. This is a 7-cost card that says transform one of your Yeti into a 6/6 Jotun, or Jotun. The campaign pronounces it, by the way, both ways. It is pronounced both Jotun and Jotun in the campaign, so you have no confirmation of which one is correct. I like them both. I guess we'll use them both interchangeably because apparently the campaign does not care. So, but in any case, so. This is not a fast spell, so you can't do this as a trick, which is a really, really sad thing, because that is the one thing that makes this card really exciting, is if the Yeti turns into a Jotun, you know, at speed. But I think for flavor reasons, you just can't do that, because this is clearly a ritual. And the thing that is really interesting about this card, I think, is the overall flavor. We have known that there is some sort of relationship between the Yeti and the Jotun previously. Like, basically, they really do seem to be very similar in temperament. The Jotuns have Jotun hurlers who throw snowballs. They have Jotun punters who kick Yeti around. Clearly, they have a kind of antagonistic relationship, but the Jotun do have always sort of seemed like grown-up Yeti, and now we have actually established that Yeti can grow up to be Jotun. So that's pretty interesting. Like, it's a really cool bit of flavor to show that transformation from a Yeti to a Jotun as a kind of a magical ritual of some kind. It gives a lot of sort of flavor to the world and gives you a better idea of what the Jotun and the Yeti are about. So overall, that's pretty cool. As to the card itself, this is not like the power primal card that I'm looking for in my legendaries. I think that it is interesting, and it's very, very Yeti specific, which I don't really like. Yetis are interesting to me, but it's not my favorite particular brand. I do think this is a card designed specifically for people who really like Yeti, and getting a vanilla Jotun out of it, as well as 2 extra Yeti of your choice, can certainly get you quite a bit. The main thing that this can get you, of course, is Wump, who is just still the king of all the Yetis. He's very, very good at making a lot of bad things happen to your opponent, triggering all the Yeti infiltrates, and just creating lots and lots of shenanigans. So overall, this card offers a really sizable amount of card advantage, a good effect. It's a slow spell, so it's probably going to... you're going to lose the Giant, most likely, but it creates enough threats that it's kind of scary, and I think at triple blue influence, it's not going to be ranked competitive, but it's interesting. All right, next up. So we got Jotun Burst song. There was a card released in Spanish, which we now have the English version of, Hellfire Oni, which says, ultimate, when you play a weapon on Hellfire Oni, play an additional copy of that weapon on her. I don't know if we talked about this card previously, but now that she has an English copy, I would like to say a bit more on her. And I do think that, like, overall, this card is really interesting. I expect there to be better weapons in the Grim Road. Like, overall, the cool things that you can put on her include things like Shogun Scepter, Copper Hall, the 2/2 Copper Hall one that plays a Minotaur, Hellfire Rifle, or Ornate Katana. Anything with a summon effect that is a weapon is really, really delightful for dual wielding. And this is one of those cards that, again, offers that potential to push Oni Quartermaster over the edge into a viable deck, which is just... that's the kind of fun that I'm really happy about. I really like Oni Quartermaster decks, playing like Rakano Artisan and dumb stuff like Brazen Daredevil, and slightly less dumb stuff like Copper Hall Paladin. So Hellfire Oni is another card that really behaves well with weapons and is just a lot of fun. And I like her design. I like the whole dual wielding concept. I think that, like, in general, just getting extra copies of weapons is really interesting. And even if you're playing like 2 copies of like Spiked Helm to create a bunch of draw off of the Oni Quartermaster, then that's just a delightful time. This card has some fun applications, and I think she also has some potential to be pretty good in a Rakana weapons deck. But she's a little bit late, her stat line's a little bit weak, so she's pretty likely to get removed early, so you gotta be pretty careful about that. But fun draft card. Should create some waves. I think my favorite thing, oh man, Hellfire Oni double Peacekeeper's Prod is probably the best one. Gosh, there's a lot of cool things there. That's a fun design. Okay, next legendary, Gear Cruncher. Summon, play a 1/1 Grenadin for each Grenadin in your void. Pay 3 and exhaust Gear Cruncher to deal 1 damage to an enemy unit for each of your Grenadin. So, a 3/4 Grenadin that plays a bunch of Grenadin, and then you can pay 3 to burn your opponent for a ridiculous amount of damage. This is a token burn spell like none other. If you have 10 power, this card will probably end the game, because Gear Cruncher into Exhaust Pay 3 is free, and I don't believe that there is time to respond to it. You get to play it, you get the Grenadin, and then you get to pay 3. I think that, well, the summon effect might actually give you a chance to respond to Gear Cruncher. Yeah, that seems pretty likely. Oh, is it an enemy unit? Fair enough. Fair enough. Unit, not player. Chat is correcting me here. Alright, so regardless, he creates a bunch of Grenadin and spreads out a bunch of damage. Not gonna actually give you that final bit of push, but that's fine. That does lower my estimation of this card quite a bit. It's just a really, really fun Grenadin card, and it will almost certainly fill your board with Grenadin in a token deck. I don't think there's too much to say about the design. Like, you fill your board with Grenadin, you kill the big blockers with the Gear Cruncher, and if you give it Overwhelm, then you can get that final bit of reach that you love. But overall, like, most of what he's doing is just making it so that the board is impossible for anything that isn't gonna die to tokens already. Gear Crunchers kind of win more. He doesn't do a terrible lot here, but like, it is pretty nice to have a card that creates that many Grenadin on the back end. And the basic idea is that if you run out of Grenadin completely, Gear Cruncher is going to refill in a way that's pretty spectacular. So, yeah. that is one way to fill your board up completely with tokens. I don't think token decks often have a lot of difficulty filling their board up with tokens at 7, but it's not a bad place to go for it, and I think that it's going to be pretty reasonable for a Grenadin-focused deck. So, cool stuff. Alright. Yeah, the reason I say win more is that basically, if you haven't won with Grenadin by the time you're at 7, then you probably weren't going to win with them anyways. There's probably just going to be enough defense. Like, you can fill your board with Grenadin long before Gear Cruncher comes out, so it just restocks, and if you were still in a losing position then, they're just as likely to have a harsh rule. I don't know. I guess it's not particularly win more, but it feels a little bit win more. Alright, is that everything? No, we got strategize. Now, this one's a low quality image, I apologize. Okay, strategize is an important card. So 2 cost, draw 2 cards, and then put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. This card is legitimately powerful, and it's a fairly good uncommon for Primal. Like, I would say that this is a card that's actually adding quite a bit to Primal's general kit. Similar to Trailblaze, but I think quite a bit better, actually. So draw 2, then put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. It gives you a lot in terms of options. It essentially gives you access to... So Second Sight will give you access to the top 2 cards of your deck, which gives you a better chance of drawing power. But then you have to put a card on top of your deck, and that card, if it is not a card that you want, is not going to be all that good for you. So Second Sight is good with Echo and Fate, but it's only good in those circumstances. Whereas Strategize is you draw your 2 cards, you get your probably almost guaranteed power, which is one of the crazy things about this card, is that it's very, very likely to get you out of bad positions in terms of power. Anything that draws you 2 cards at 2 allows you to have access to power at a much easier rate. And I think that this actually allows you to have a much more reliable curve, which is something that Strategize is pretty crazy for. But late game, you can use it to put power on the bottom of your deck, and then basically have much less time with flooding. And that's fairly important. People are pointing out the Trailblaze as a fast spell. I don't think that matters. You want to strategize on 2 every time. And like, it is actually just a really good way to set up your early turns for your control decks. And this is a very powerful card in control decks. So yeah, you get rid of a bad card, and you draw 2 cards that are good cards, and you get deeper and deeper into your deck. This gives you huge options. We talk about in our Eternal Basics videos how drawing cards is both about increasing your options and also increasing your card advantage. Strategize is not a card advantage card, but in terms of increasing your options and allowing you more reliable plays and more interesting plays in general, I think this card is just absolutely insane. This is the card you use to get deep into Harsh Rule, in Splash decks. It is only 1 blue influence, so you can play it very easily in those kind of colors. And like, overall, paired with Wisdom of the Elders, this is what's going to make control decks much more viable as time goes on. Like, I think that this card is a really, really powerful uncommon, and it should not be underestimated. I'm excited to play with it. And I'm glad to see Primal getting some power. I expect that there will be a few more cards along these lines because Primal has been suffering for a while. But this is a very, very good start. Alright. That, I believe, is all of the cards before the Bond article. Yeah, we've covered, I think, everything. Oh, no, there's one more. Challenge by Law. Challenge by Law is a 6-cost card, and this is what happens when I take low-quality cards. That reads, kill an enemy unit and silence the rest. At 6 cost and double green, I don't know that Challenge by Law is going to be particularly ranked viable, but it's a dang fun card in Draft. Being able to silence your opponent's units is pretty crazy, and if you can silence a bunch of their units all at once, that's really, really nice. At this point, Justice has access to so many silence effects that you're probably not going to be running Challenge by Law, because you have, like, if you need mass silence, you have the new card Hush, or Shush, that gives you silence on everything, every single card that is a problem for you. Shush in particular locks down cockroaches and dawnwalkers and does some pretty crazy things there. I think we did cover Shush, right? That is a 3-cost green-yellow that silences a unit and silences every copy in your hand and deck. If we haven't, I apologize, but well, that's what it does. So yeah, with the excess of silence cards, I don't think that kill a unit and then also silence a bunch of stuff is anything that Justice is necessarily in need of. It is nice that it is unconditional removal. There aren't that many cards of that sort in Justice, but we have access to Harsh Rule and Leave a Witness, so we rarely need that type of thing. Overall, I would say that Challenge by Law is not going to play in Ranked, but it functions similar to Inspire Obedience in Draft. It's a good, just great rare to pick up because you need removal, and I think that it'll play really well and have a fun pattern when you do that. So that's really nice. In addition, this card is a green card with Eileen on it, which is fairly important because it means that there's a green-blue Eileen out there. Yeah, we've got a Huru Eileen, I'm sure, at this point. What we are seeing, I believe, is Eileen fighting, and I haven't looked at the art for this card or checked the Reddit, so I'm wildly speculating, but I'm pretty sure that's Eileen fighting Vadius Clanfather. It's kind of hard to tell from the art. I don't remember what Vadius looks like specifically, but we have already seen an image of Eileen reclaiming her crown, so assumably she challenges Vadius by Law, gets her crown back, and takes control of the Skycrag, then heads for Argentport. So we will see an Eileen Huru card very shortly, and I expect that she will be spoiled pretty soon. Alright. Or she could be a Justice Eileen. Like, she could be raw Justice. That's the other option. And that's a pretty reasonable option as well. Alright, I'm getting confirmations from chat that that is in fact Vadius. That is all of the extra cards. Let's talk about Bond now, shall we? Okay, we have many cards and many things to break down. This is what happens when I wait for 3 days. I should have just made one over the weekend. Okay, so talking about the Bond mechanic, and I'm going to pull this up just to make sure that I get it right, but it's actually pretty straightforward. So Bond is a new mechanic, and we will go ahead and show our first Bond card here. Here's Aerial Attendant, 4/3, flying Warcry Bond. With Entomb, you gain 3 armor. What is Bond, you ask? Or perhaps you don't, because you already know. Bond is, whenever you play this card, you can exhaust a unit of the same type, which is to say Aerial Attendant is a Valkyrie, so you can exhaust another Valkyrie, and that will reduce the cost of the card that is bonding by the amount of strength that that unit has. So if you have a Valkyrie Enforcer, you can play Aerial Attendant on turn 4 by bonding it with a Valkyrie Enforcer. The Valkyrie Enforcer will not be able to attack that turn, but you will get a pretty cheap 4/3 with Flying, Warcry, and an Entomb effect that helps out relic weapons. So not a bad set of stats together. Overall, Aerial Attendant is not the card that excites me about Bond, but I'm very excited by Bond in general. This card is just a good example of how you can sort of step from one card to another and create sort of the slow Bond access. Now, Bond exhausts similar to Mentor, which is something that we do want to talk about a little bit, because Mentor was an ability that did not have a high amount of presence in Ranked in Omens of the Past. But I think that this is a much better mechanic because it is actually significantly better for pushing tempo as opposed to not pushing tempo. So with Bond, you are getting a very significant advantage in an extra unit by reducing the cost of the units, and you can also still do essentially the thing where you play a unit and then you can immediately bond it. So if you have a 7/7 Valkyrie, for example, like a Roland's Honor Guard, you can play it, exhaust it, and play an Aerial Attendant for free. So pretty interesting stuff going on there. Now, oh, someone's asking if Crown would grant Bond. I don't know. It could happen. It would probably be awkward, but if you did it to Clockroaches, it would be kind of fun. Bond does just read Bond, so that's a question that might actually be something to ask about. But yeah, okay. So yeah, Aerial Attendant is a low power Valkyrie for this setup. I think the Flying and Warcry are both pretty relevant. So as a draft Valkyrie, this card is pretty nuts, but I think she just doesn't play in Ranked. She's got too few health, the Entomb effect isn't powerful enough, and the Warcry, while good, is not a Warcry 2, so I'm not wild about her in Ranked. But there are 2 other cards with Bond that have been released, and they are both quite capable of being played in Ranked, in particular Ranked decks. The first is Zeliha the Vain. 4/4, deadly with Bond. 6 cost with 2 Shadow Influence, and the ability pay 4 to play a -2, -1 Affliction on an enemy unit, and give Zeliha +2/+1. So if Zeliha's up against a 6/6, she can pay 4 to give that unit -2, -1, turn it into a 4/5, and turn herself into a 6/5. Overall, not too bad. Definitely allows her to match up against Sandstorm Titans and other very scary things pretty easily. What's more, Zeliha is an unseen. You can play her fairly cheaply with other unseen, and if you have a fairly aggressive unseen, for example, the 4 cost 5/5, Zeliha plays immediately after that for 1 cost. So you could essentially, on a turn where it is night, play a 4 cost 5/5 and then immediately follow up with Zeliha. That's a really reasonable amount of strength to be pushing out with an unseen. Another unseen that can trigger her in exactly 1 cost is the Silverwing Avenger? Silverwing, oh man. Shelterwing Rider, that's right. The 5/5 Aegis unit that triggers Zeliha fairly quickly. So there are ways to cheat her out pretty fast. And then regardless, she is a really reasonable 6-drop on her own. As a 4/4 deadly, she's going to trade with anything big. With the pay 4 ability, she has the ability to kill small tokens, to make herself bigger, which is not as important as killing small tokens and making your opponent's stuff worse, but also she can just basically power sync to your heart's content and have a really, really fun time. And because the afflictions are, in fact, curses, which, yeah, that seems fairly likely, that's going to be very relevant to the unseen that care about curses. So, yeah. It's all good stuff. I think overall Zeliha is doing a lot of interesting things all at once. She doesn't provide immediate board impact, but she is big enough and scary enough to actually be a threat on her own. So she will always trade evenly with removal or a unit, and that means that at the very least she's card for card. But her potential to be better than that is significant, and it relies on either her ability to jump out very quickly off of a tempo play with Bond, or her ability to basically just rule the late game with all of her afflictions. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. I think Zeliha's got some good late game design, some good early game design, and some good mid game design. And when you're seeing a little bit of everything in all of those spots, then that means the card is pretty likely to fit into quite a few decks. So I think that she's pretty reasonable and a very cool looking card. That's not the most exciting one though. The most exciting one costs 16. And that is Nova Quake Titan. Alright, Nova Quake Titan is a Sentinel. I will remind you that all Titans are Sentinels. Sandstorm Titan, Lava Blood Goliath, basically any giant in red or yellow is absolutely going to be a Sentinel. So, Nova Quake can bond with Sandstorm Titan, amongst other things. Alright. 10-11, bond, and when you bond Nova Quake Titan, that's an important note because you can't just Grasping at Shadows this out. Silence each enemy unit and put them into the enemy hand. Then draw a card for each of your relics. Okay, so if you can cast Nova Quake Titan, you probably win the game because you are silencing a pile of your opponent's units, you are completely wiping his board in a way that's fairly relevant, and you're generating a lot of relic card advantage, which I'm going to go ahead and guess that you have Power Stones in this deck. I wouldn't be surprised if you have Xenon Obelisk in this deck, and I think there are other relics that you might really like that could probably be pretty useful here. Maybe you're playing like a silly Crown deck, or maybe you're doing other things with relics. I think there's some time relics that we haven't seen yet, but yeah, overall, some pretty interesting stuff there. Now, Nova Quake Titan's most exciting options are the ones where you can cheat him out. I think overall, just playing like the 8 cost 8/7 and then following up with Nova Quake Titan is probably a pretty strong way to go about your day. Big Praxis with Heart of the Vault and other things like that can probably play Nova Quake Titan without too much difficulty. It'll be hard, but it'll be worth it. So like you can just do that in Big Praxis without cheating. And I think that overall you have a really solid way to just sort of end the game and force your opponent to just concede to your insane value. So that's something. At a 10-11, this card is basically unkillable. It cannot be obliterated, it cannot be burned down. It is monocolored, so it can be annihilated pretty quickly, but it's just going to trade with everything with the exception of Spirit of Resistance, which nothing trades with. Okay, so when you bond Nova Quake Titan, yeah, all of that stuff looking good. Let's talk about the bonds. So the main cheaty ways that people have been talking about to create Nova Quake Titan are Idol of Destrin, which I don't particularly like, and Moment of Creation, which I think is really actually quite good. If you're playing a Praxis assembly line style deck, like Big Praxis with assembly line, secret pages, the Humbug Swarm, lots and lots of token generators and spells, then you can get enough spells in particular off of Find the Way to set up a really, really big Moment of Creation pretty quickly. In addition, this is a set that has access to Temporal Distortion, so you can do that at end of turn if you want. So that's something fun. And then Moment of Creation can just get you a free Nova Quake Titan on the turn that you play it. So you can be essentially literally just play Moment of Creation, immediately exhaust a 16 health Titan, and play Nova Quake Titan. Pretty nuts stuff. Yeah, like I think that this card is kind of bananas. It is really, really fun, and basically that's all there is to it. Anytime that you play Nova Quake Titan, you're probably in a position to win the game. It's not immediate, and it's not gonna do it every time, but it's too fun not to play, I think. Giving this Destiny with Talir doesn't work because, again, it has to bond to trigger its abilities. But it's not too bad just to get as a raw 10-11. I think that that's a pretty reasonable way to go about things. So that's all pretty solid. Yeah, so Nova Quake Titan is an exciting, fun legendary. I think we saw a lot of exciting, fun legendaries in general, and I think that overall the set's looking really, really strong coming in. I think we're pretty excited to see what's going to happen next. There's going to be a spoiler on IGN on Thursday, I know. We're hoping that the streamers will get spoilers, but we haven't seen any yet. I will certainly announce on Twitter if that does happen. And beyond that, thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you like this video. And to the YouTube folks, thank you so much for watching.